In our next Chapter 6 lecture, we will be considering the very serious topic of child sexual. I provided you in this PowerPoint with a possible progression of child sexual abuse. We're going to look at various stages that can occur in a case of child abuse. Now, not every single one of these stages actually happens. Maybe the abuse is detected before we move on to one of these phases, or maybe even a phase is skipped, although it's unlikely that it will be skipped. But these are typical stages, typical phases in the progression of child sexual abuse. Phase 1 involves the perpetrator coming into contact with the child, and so we call this engagement. Now, in some instances, this is not difficult at all. Maybe the abuser is a parent, maybe they're another relative, and so they have easy access and natural access to the child. In other instances, engagement has to be gained through more of a process. We often think of child abuse as occurring with a stranger lurking in the bushes, attacking a child. But that rarely happens. It can happen, but it doesn't happen very often. Typically, as we know from the data, the child abuser is someone who is known to the child before the abuse occurs. So again, it could be a family member, but it could be a neighbor. It could be maybe someone who works as a coach with the child, or like in Jerry Sandusky's case, who runs some kind of camp for children and gains access to them that way. But somehow the perpetrator has to gain access to the child. This is often known as not just engagement, but when the perpetrator starts preparing the child for the abuse that's going to come. This is known as grooming. So again, this is typically not just a stranger bursting into the child's home and raping them, but this is someone who gains access to the child. Now, one of the things that we know from child sexual abuse is it's one of the most underreported crimes. And so children are often, as we'll see through these phases, there are various steps along the way in which they may be discouraged from reporting, or maybe adults won't believe them. We'll talk about that more as we go through the stages. But so engagement, somehow the perpetrator gains access to the child and begins grooming them, begins preparing them for what's going to happen. In phase 2, some kind of sexual interaction begins. So this could be actual intercourse, anal, oral, vaginal, or it could be touching. It could be fondling. It could be any of these kinds of behaviors that are inappropriate. How does the perpetrator gain this sexual interaction with the child? Well, there are really two common methods. They can either pressure the child into sex, or they can force the child into sex. So pressured sex would involve things like enticement, which is maybe they say to the child, "Hey, let's play a game. This is what adults do when they when they want to show that they love each other." Or here's a fun game. I'll show you mine, you show me yours, and we'll keep going. And then maybe we'll touch and we'll do other things. So they try to turn it into a game. So they persuade, they cajole. They tell the child, "I love you, and this is how I show that I love you. So why don't you show me that you love me?" These kinds of things. So one form of pressured sex is enticement. Another form is entrapment. This is where you make the child feel obligated or guilty. "Look, I did all these nice things for you. Don't you want to do something nice for me? Don't you know that you're always supposed to do something nice when somebody does something nice to you?" And so Jerry Sandusky, in his case, he was alleged to have taken a lot of his victims to Penn State football games, provided them with all kinds of toys and other things, and then basically said, "I did these really nice things for you. Why don't you do something for me?" So the child feels guilty if they don't actually return the favor. They don't realize, because of their age, that they should say no, that you aren't obligated to provide somebody with sex just because they did something nice for you. So pressured sex doesn't involve any actual force or threat of force, but it involves maybe, again, trickery or entrapment, enticement, these things. Forced sex actually involves threats or actual force. So maybe holding the child down while having sex with them, while the child is screaming and saying no. So that would be actual force. Or threatening. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to kill your parents. I'm going to hurt them. I'm going to hurt your dog. Again, we're talking about children, so they may not be able to think through all the possibilities of whether this force could actually happen, whether this threat could actually happen. And, do they have to give in to sex just because their family dog has been threatened? Any of these kinds of things, the child is probably not in a position to really understand what they could do. So instead, they may give in because they're really scared that these things will happen. Phase 3 occurs after the sex has happened. So if we move to phase 3, if sex actually happened, it's very likely the perpetrator is going to convince the child to keep the abuse secret. And so, either this could be brought about through rewards. Here, keep this secret and we'll continue to do this because you're my special child. And so I'm really showing you that I love you, and let's not share this with anybody else, because then you wouldn't be special anymore. So it could be gained through that method, or it could be gained through threats. You tell anybody, I'll kill you. Or you tell anybody, they'll never believe you. They'll tell you that you're bad. They'll tell you that, all these kinds of things. So whatever means that the perpetrator uses, they're going to try to ensure that this abuse is kept secret. We may progress to phase 4, but this doesn't always happen. As I said, child sexual abuse is one of the most underreported crimes that we have. So we may not progress to phase 4, which is disclosure. So somehow, either intentionally or accidentally, the child reveals the abuse. Maybe it's not the child actually saying it, but it's an aware adult who notices changes in the child and is suspicious and questions the child further. Or maybe it is the child revealing it themselves. Maybe they tell somebody, another parent, a trusted adult, maybe even a police officer comes to their school and talks about some of these issues, and they say, oh, that happened to me. They don't think it's bad maybe, but they tell the police officer or their teacher or someone. So either intentionally or accidentally they reveal the abuse. Now maybe it's through their actions. They're playing with a friend, and because the adult has told them, you do these things, these sexual things, when you want to show that you love somebody. So they love their best friend, so they try to do the things to their best friend, and maybe the best friend's parent notices it and says, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? And then when they explore further, they find out that things have been happening to this child. So one way or another, the abuse is disclosed. I've had students who've come to me after I've given these lectures and have talked to me about child sexual abuse. And in a couple instances, I may have been the first adult that they've disclosed to, and the abuse happened a decade ago. They've been keeping it secret and bottled up inside themselves for a very long time. One of the things we know about child sexual abuse, not only that it's underreported, but it's very common, unfortunately. I can guarantee that some of you who are listening to this lecture have been abused. I guarantee it. And I want to reach out now and say that if you have been abused, you can feel free to contact me. And I will point you to maybe some counselors. I will try to help you through it. I've had personal experience in this area. My family has gone through this. And so I feel pretty confident that I can help you, lead you on a path that will at least help you get through some of the issues that you're undoubtedly dealing with. But the first issue is to realize that you've done nothing bad. Okay, you were a victim. You have done nothing bad, but you have the power to do something about it now to make your life better. And because child abuse is so common, you are not alone. Don't feel guilty. Others, unfortunately, have endured child abuse too. And so you're not that rare individual who's strange, who's weird, or any of those other feelings you may be feeling. Unfortunately, child abuse is, in that sense, because it's common, almost a normal phenomenon. I don't mean normal, by saying normal, I don't mean acceptable, but I mean that it's part of our society, and it happens. And so one of the biggest reliefs that I've found in my own family and with others is just the mere fact of telling someone and finding out that you are not alone is very helpful in recovering. So disclosure, if you've never disclosed and abuse has happened to you, I think it's essential that you do disclose to someone. It doesn't mean there's going to be a trial of the offender. Doesn't mean that anything's going to happen to them, but it will help you to recover. Unfortunately, we often progress to phase 5, which is suppression. The people close to the child try to discount or deny the abuse. I know I did it in our family. The abuse happened to my stepdaughters, and we at first didn't believe it because it was being done by their father. And my wife and I didn't want to believe it at first. We eventually did believe them, but at first we weren't believing it. We thought, no, nobody would do this to their child. Try to avoid that. If some child reports to you that they've been abused, support them. Don't become the investigator. Don't question them about all the things that have happened to them, but try to get them to someone who is trained, a counselor, a police officer, someone who has experience. Don't deny. Don't tell them this never happened, you're lying, because then they're probably never going to reveal. Don't blame the child. Again, don't be the judge and jury in this situation. Instead, get help for the child and let the experts. One of the things at Penn State that we've been trying to do is to educate people to spot the signs of child abuse so that another situation like the Jerry Sandusky affair doesn't happen. So you can see here on this list various signs, physical signs of child sexual abuse. So we're really looking for changes in the child. Obvious ones are listed at the top: difficulty walking or sitting, bloody underclothes, torn underclothes, bleeding, bruises, those kinds of things. But they can be also subtle. Does the child suddenly have unexplained frequent urinary or yeast infections? This may mean that they're afraid to go to the bathroom because of what happened to them. They're holding in their pee, and that may lead to urinary or yeast infections. They're not cleaning themselves very well because they don't like to touch their private parts because of what happened to them. So try to identify or at least notice, be aware of the signs of some behavioral signs. Again, we're looking for changes in their behavior. So we can see here that maybe they are really becoming hesitant to be hugged or have any kind of physical contact. They used to be outgoing, but now they're depressed. They're showing signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. They're expressing suicidal thoughts. They are self-harming. They have phobias. My daughter, after being abused, was afraid all the time that her father was going to come through the door, so she constantly had to check to see if the doors were locked. Are they having trouble in school? Are they missing more school? Are their grades declining? Any kinds of major changes. This could warrant further investigation, whether by you, and again, realize that you're probably not a professional, or by others. Ask some general questions if anything bad is happening to this child. Look to see if there's any kind of adult who's acting strangely around the child. Or it could be another child. It could be another child who's abusing them. So look for these signs. Be aware. Don't dismiss them. Follow your gut.